What we're going to do is make this fresh summer salad. It has very little ingredients and very little seasoning, because when you're using ingredients that are kind of at the peak of season, then they all naturally just taste delicious on their own. So I'm not doing much to it, but it is also a good example of using a lot of different components and some of those macronutrients, those main categories of nutrients that we'll be talking about in our nutrition discussion a little bit later on. So let's dive in. So this is a snap pea, a sugar snap pea, black bean, and grilled corn salad. But there's some other components in it that are just super delicious. And what I try to do is like draw out the flavor of things and kind of add a little combination of texture, because I think I shared with you all, I'm not a big fan of just regular leafy salads, but when you put all different textures in there, then I'm game, I'm on board. So one of the things that I did ahead of time, just since we don't have some cooking equipment here with us today, but I went ahead and just charred up this corn. So I put a little bit of olive oil on it, a little bit of salt and pepper just to season it, but then I stuck it under the broiler and then finished it off on a cast iron skillet. So you have these beautiful kind of roasted marks, these char marks that are going to give it some extra flavor, because the corn will have some sweetness to it, right? But you'll draw out those sugars when you add a little bit more of this charring on it. So I'm going to start with that. And for the recipe, you just use 2 cobs, but I'm kind of making a bigger batch for all of us to enjoy today. So what I wanted to show you also was a technique. So I'm using 6 corn cobs today, just so we have enough for everybody, for everything to go around. Now you could just easily set this corn like this and shave off the kernels, right? But that tends to get a little bit messy on your cutting board. So what you can easily do too is put it inside the bowl and take your knife and do that instead. So that's what I'm going to do, so I don't have corn kernels splattering all over the place. And my bowl is kind of tall, so you can't really see it, but it helps to just kind of take your knife slowly and just go down the side, see, as I did there. And so I'm going to just do that with our 6 corn cobs here. And the other thing I wanted to share with you all about the corn is that I tend to save the cobs. Does anybody know why I would be saving cobs if there's no corn on it? Just this part.
Maybe like a vegetable stock?
Yes. It makes one of the most delicious vegetable stocks. So, and think about all the flavors that are on it now, right? Like it has sort of this nice caramelized sweetness. Corn in general, if you get it at the peak season, is going to be sweet, but when you roast it a little bit like I just did, that's gonna, and it's a shame to just toss this because there's a lot of flavor in here. So what I do is I typically just put a couple of these, if I've been making salads or whatever, I'll put them in a Ziploc bag, and when I'm ready to make a stock, I'll just put them in some cold water. I also have some green onions that I put under the broiler to get that similar taste. I could throw in some ends of those and then just, put a lid on the stock pot, bring it to a boil, and then lower it down and let it simmer. And you'll have some of the most delicious vegetable stock that you could then use in, maybe you're making a grain and you wanted to add a little bit of flavor. Don't use the box vegetable stock that you buy at the store. You could use something like this. Great in any kind of grains, even making just a light little broth, sipping broth, that would be delicious. So always, I'm a big fan of using everything. So I'm going to just go through and add the rest of this corn. What are some of your favorite summer vegetables that you all like to prepare as we're moving into kind of summer season here? Cucumbers. Okay, what do you like to do with them?
I like to sometimes pickle them a little bit,
yes.
Or I'll just have them on the salad with some lemon on it.
That sounds really good. Yeah. Do you like to buy any particular kind of cucumbers? Because I've seen so many different varieties now.
I really like the seedless ones, the big long ones.
Oh, like the English cucumbers.
Yes,
Yes.
Those, the big long ones. Those are pretty good. You could also put those in you want to make one of those tea sandwiches with cream cheese?
Oh, yeah, that would be good. That would be good. You know what I saw recently was a version of that, but they're called pequeños because they're baby miniature English cucumbers. They're super cute and they taste just like English cucumbers, but they're just really tiny. Anybody else have any summer favorites?
they call them farmer's onions up north, but I discovered you call them barbecue onions here, where they have the big bulb. So they look like a green onion, except it's kind of like a leaf head, and then with the long green stalks.
Yes,
Yeah,
those
they're
are
very
really good. Yes, if you can find them. I do see them at HEB every once in a while, and they are nice. Or if you go to a farmer's market, you might
Right.
see them as well.
What do you
What's it called?
I have like a vegetable salad that I make where I cut up like the different colored peppers, like the yellow, orange, and red. Cucumbers, usually it's the English, because I don't want the seeds in a spooky one. And then I'll put like some broccoli, some cauliflower, cut it up, and like some tomatoes, like the sweetened, ripened ones. And then there is a dressing that's made in Perrysburg, Ohio. It's called Garlic Expressions, and you can actually get it at HEB here for about $5-6.
Okay.
You have to look for it. It's in like a green, either a plastic or a glass bottle. It depends on how many bottles they've broken during shipment. So they have looked at plastic depending on the season. And it has aged garlic in it.
Ooh.
And it's so good. So I take some of that and like sprinkle it on there, mix it in, and just leave it in the refrigerator for a little bit. And add other vegetables like the farmers or green onions, because I always have some type of onion or a red onion, depending on what I have or what I want. And at least let it like marinate in the cold for about an hour. And you can leave it overnight or a couple days and nothing goes wrong with it, but it's very, very good.
That sounds delicious. That sounds really good. I'm just going to bring your eyes back to our beautiful corn now that I've just shaved off the cob. And so you have kind of like these, I don't like to break them apart, but you have these nice little chunks. Any kind of salad, I think we were talking about this a while back when we made a different salad. Like, you can mix it all together. That's what I'm essentially going to do with this recipe. But it would also be nice if you just platter it, you know, if you just kind of do the layers and have a nice, beautiful display to share if you're doing a barbecue this summer or you're just having friends over for brunch. I like to make my salads in different variations just because it changes things up, but it's essentially the same ingredients. So thank you for sharing that, though. Cucumbers and those onions. Yeah, those onions. I'll have to. My other favorites, if you can find them, are cipollini onions. And they're these beautiful, cute little, almost if you think of like a sweet yellow onion, they kind of look like that, but they're flatter and smaller, and they'll come in yellow or red. If you find them, please cook with them. You can put them on the grill. They are super sweet. They can be used just like a regular onion, but I don't know, something about their cute shape and their size. It's great for cooking. Okay, so to this corn, we're going to add, we're doing plant protein today, and we're using black beans. So black beans just canned, so I gave them a quick little rinse, drained them. But black beans are one of my favorites, easy go-to. And you could use any kind of bean, honestly. You could use a white bean, that would be just as delicious. But it's just a can of beans per the recipe that we're using.
Or mix them.
You could mix them too. Yeah, I mean, this salad is super colorful if you see the picture behind me. And again, we eat with our eyes, right? So if things look visually pleasing, we're going to just enjoy it even more, and people are going to want to try it. I always talk about, especially with people who are trying things for the first time, kids are, notorious for like, if it just doesn't look good, they're not even going to want to try it. And I think adults are the same way. We're like that too, right? Okay, so we've got the beans in there. And then next what we're going to add, I have some already chopped up just so you don't have to sit through all of that. But we have some just simple cherry tomatoes, and there's all different varieties. So these are just some grape tomatoes. I have a couple of tomato plants on my balcony that are doing okay, but not thriving. I'm not sure. I feel like they like the heat, but they got maybe too early in a start, and so there was a lot of wind on my balcony that kind of pushed them around, and so they're kind of struggling. But they do produce some beautiful. I think the sun golds are the ones that are thriving the best. And when you taste a garden tomato, it really is night and day between the ones you get at the store. These are I always kind of look at the package when I purchase tomatoes and make sure that, they're not mushy, they're not bruised, and they have enough color in them, right? Because that's going to indicate their sweetness. So these looked pretty good. I'm just cutting them in half. My favorite little small tomatoes are those pear tomatoes that are like orange or yellow. But you could do a variety of tomatoes in this recipe too. You could change the color, and that would be really pretty. Okay, so we've got tomatoes, our corn, and our beans. The other thing that I have here is sugar snap peas. And so these are really some of my favorite vegetables because they can I know a lot of people like to eat them, in their lunch just as a snack. Make sure when you're purchasing them that there's no like unusual, marks on them. They're not brown or bruised. This is like the perfect one. It's a great size. It's gonna chop really well. And you could put these in whole, but I kind of do something a little fancy, which I'll show you here. I'll just clean off my cutting board because I don't want to slip around. But I cut them kind of what they call on the bias. So I cut them on a diagonal. And you could just do it once in half, like so, and just get, 2 nice pieces, and it reveals some of the little peas inside. Or you could do it kind of what I really like to do to kind of get more bang for my buck on it. It's basically half a pound that we're using for this recipe. Is I leave the tip of my knife on the cutting board, and I use kind of this back end of my blade, and I just sort of do this slicing motion, but I'm using more of the back end of my blade to do that, and I'm just dragging my knife like this to get these beautiful diagonal cuts. And so you'll end up with a different shape that looks something like this. And so it just kind of gives it a different look. So if you wanted to kind of fancy up your salad and impress your friends and family, you could do that. But here's kind of what we have. It's this beautiful combination of the texture, but also you're revealing some of that nice, the little peas inside. Gives it some more shape and visuals. So I'm going to add those in. It's so great. And finish up these because why not? These peas obviously are a great source of fiber. Also a great source of carbohydrates. And we'll be talking about, finding good quality, high quality proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, because there's definitely a distinction. And there's a reason why it's important to do that, which we'll get into in a little bit. But back to the salad. The other thing that we're going to add are these grilled onions. Now, those onions you were talking about would be perfect in this salad. You could do the same thing. I just put these under the broiler, but you could put them on your grill just for a few minutes. And it brings out the natural sweetness of this onion. So what I'm going to do, I already have them all nicely charred here. I took a couple classes from a really wonderful, creative young chef several years ago. And he was just he was hilarious because he was like a maniac with the torch, like the kitchen torch, and he would torch everything. But he did it because it drew out the flavor of a lot of foods. And the craziest thing I saw him torch was an avocado. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes make this salad with an avocado, but it was amazing the difference of how it changed the flavor of an avocado. And it's a fruit, right? But when you char it, it brings out some of that sweetness, and it adds that element of smokiness to it too, which I love. And when you think about summer, that's kind of what you think about. The grilled meats, all of that sort of, as we were talking about earlier, you're creating that sort of picture and that experience of the food. You all probably have some great memories of family barbecues, or just places you've been in the summer where you've enjoyed a really nice meal. And that's really important when you're putting those recipes together. But I just thought it was kind of interesting how you can simply change the dynamic and to take something that you wouldn't have thought, like an ingredient like an avocado, and turn it into something completely different. So if you're so inclined, you could also do that with your avocado and throw that in the salad too. But for today, no avocado. We're just doing these green onions, and I'm just going to kind of cut them in some nice little chunks here. The smell of this is just incredible. If you had some left over, this would be really great if you wanted to make like a breakfast or a brunch quiche. You could do the same thing with these onions, because I smell the sweetness from this. Anything kind of in that onion family, like leeks, would also work really well. So see, this is what I was saying. These little ends, I'm not going to put in the salad because it has the root, but I will save them because then I can add them to my stock with the corn. And that'll be super delicious. So slightly different textures being added here. Does anybody have any fun family kind of memories, summer barbecues, or anything that they really, or traditions maybe that you enjoy as the weather gets a little bit warmer? And you're trying to find different ways to enjoy mealtime with family?
No, but I saw a recipe. My sister shared a recipe with me with a watermelon.
Okay.
And so you get the steak of the watermelon, you know, and then you get the cookie cutter and make perfect circles.
Uh-huh.
You slice the oranges very thin, you fold them, put them on top, and then some grapes on top, and then they're like little cakes, but they're watermelon.
Ah,
So I'm
yes.
looking forward to trying that out too.
I feel like that's a great idea. I seem to remember, I don't know if it was a couple summers ago, there was kind of a crazy trend. There's always some kind of crazy trends with food, right? For the longest time, cauliflower was kind of like the darling of food trends. But watermelons were being turned into cakes. And I think that was really cool because like people who are diabetic, I actually did one for my brother because he's diabetic. But it was really nice because you could basically make kind of like a nice square base and use any kind of simple, you could use like a Cool Whip or something that was, you know, palatable and okay for somebody like a diabetic to eat, or just keep it plain and then just decorate it with all these different fruits around it. And I thought, oh, what a sweet idea. Like you can take some summer fruit and then just doll it up and make it look like a cake. And I love watermelon. It's great because obviously fiber, right? But it's water content. And in the summer, I mean, if you get a really ripe one, and here, I mean, we see all sorts of beautiful watermelon coming through our area, and it's just, take advantage of it. Other thing you can do with watermelon, you can make like agua frescas. That's a nice simple one. Sometimes you pick a watermelon and you're like, didn't quite, wasn't quite there yet, but, add a little bit of lime juice, a little bit of sugar and some water and blend it up and you've got your agua fresca. So, okay. So we've added that, and then a couple more things we're going to add. We're going to do a little bit of fresh cilantro, and I love this. We use this in our chana masala. I'm going to just do this whole bunch. It calls for one small bunch, but I'm going to do this full bunch here. That's kind of a large, and I'm just going to run my knife through it. I'm not going to mince it really fine because I want some of the leaves in there. I don't use the stems in this particular one, but you could. You could also just save your stems and put a few in your stock that you're building over here. That's going to be a great stock, by the way. Okay, so just like that. All of these smells are just incredible. I remember when you all came in here for the chana masala and you could smell everything even before we started cooking. Like, this is also, we think about the experience of food and cooking, the smell alone, when you have beautiful ingredients that just naturally smell delicious, that's going to trigger, like your taste buds to say, what is that? I'm kind of curious about that. I'm going to try that. So I love all that. And then a couple last things we're going to do. We have some limes. We're going to squeeze 3 fresh limes and then the cheese and then our spices. And that's pretty much it. Like, it's super simple. And that's why I like it, because you can start with this recipe as is. Or you could add some things to it. Like I was saying, you could do some avocado. You could change up the tomatoes. What else might you all think about adding to this? What might be good to add or change up a little bit?
I would probably try black-eyed peas.
Ooh, that would be really good. Yes, I love that. Okay.
Quinoa?
Quinoa, yeah, just to give it a little more protein. So you'd have your black beans and then some kind of grain. And this is great. I mean, I love any kind of salad like this because you could eat it just like this or set it in the fridge for a little bit, let all the flavors kind of blend together, and then all of that's going to just intensify. So I wouldn't leave it in the fridge longer than, a day or two, just because the ingredients are raw and there are some that are a little more moist, and so it tends to get a little soggy, especially with the tomatoes in there already. But otherwise, this is a great one. It's fairly quick to make. Every time I have made it, people have said, I need that recipe. So it has gone to many, many friends and family. But I typically tend to do it with some avocado in it too, because I just like avocado. Okay, so we have our limes juiced. You could use lemon too. I just like the combination of the lime. Clean off my cutting board here.
What about instead of lime using some blood oranges?
That would be really fun. Yeah, that would change up the flavor a little bit. I suppose if you did it when you could find like Meyer lemons. Has anybody tried Meyer lemons? They are some of the most fragrant lemons, and you only kind of see them sort of in the winter or early spring because they're a winter citrus fruit. But they just have this beautiful floral fragrance, and they're sweet. So that would give kind of a different dimension, a different flavor to this, but could work really well too. Okay, so we have that. Before I add the cheese in, I'm going to add that last. We're going to add in a little bit of cumin. So this is ground cumin. I believe that's half a teaspoon of that. 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And remember, there's a little bit of olive oil in there already that I used to season the corn and the green onions. And then I'm just going to do a pinch of black pepper. And today I'm using kosher salt. Now the recipe calls for just a regular table salt, but because kosher salt we were talking about last time is a little bit bigger, I kind of like to use it just as a pinch, because the other thing that we're going to add in here that's salty is our cheese, right? And I tend to, just because I've cooked for people so many years, I tend to under season because I allow people to just taste things as they are, and then they can season as their palate, as their palate likes. I should say what their preference is. Because again, you can't really remove a lot of that seasoning and flavor once you've added it, and especially that goes a long way with salt. You want to make sure that you don't overpower anything. But if you just take a quick look, I mean, look at all the beautiful colors in that. I used to do photography with food for many years and kind of picked it up as a hobby and then started doing it professionally. And one of the things that people would often say is like, God, that looks so great. And I always would say, well, most of it is the ingredient and the rest of it is me. But if you have really nice ingredients and you don't mess with it too much, it kind of is, they sort of do what they need to do. So I'm kind of gently just sort of mixing this all together, not really pushing on it too much because I don't want those beans to get too mushed. They are canned beans. Somebody was talking about making your own beans from dried. This would work really well with chickpeas too, by the way. But yeah, so when you use canned beans, they're obviously a little bit softer, so just kind of be gentle when you mix. But then the last thing we're going to add is our cheese. And so today we're using this nice queso cotija, which is kind of a dry, crumbly, little bit saltier cheese. It's a cow's milk cheese. You can find it pretty much anywhere. There is a brand that I really love, and it's called Cacique. And if you can find that brand, try it because I think it has much more flavor. It's a little bit saltier. This one's pretty good too. It's a little more milder, not as salty. And H-E-B has it on hand. They also will sell like just a little bag of it already crumbled up. But I think it's fun to kind of crumble it yourself. And there is sort of an easy technique that I like to use. So we're going to use half a cup per the recipe, but I'm adding a little bit more because I don't think I'm quite at 1.5 cups here. These cheeses, you could even do a feta. It's kind of that similar, texture. It's a little drier, as you can see. Just kind of breaks off. Not a lot of moisture, but definitely some concentrated flavor in there. And anytime you can use an ingredient to season your food versus like salt, I'm a proponent of that because one, you get to try another ingredient. That ingredient brings its own nutritional value to your recipe, but you can experiment with it and you don't have to rely on things like adding a lot of salt, adding a lot of pepper, because the ingredient will take care of that for you. Things like olives are another good example of bringing some, saltiness to a dish without adding additional salt, just as a seasoning. So, I have some here. What I was doing is just kind of, if you don't want to get your hands dirty, you can take your cheese in a little bag and just kind of crumble it from the outside. That's kind of a cheating way to do it. But I was saying before, sometimes you got to get in there with your hands and just have fun with it. And that's part of the experience of cooking too. So I'm going to do a little bit more just because I love this cheese. So this will give you definitely a great source of protein. You have some dairy from the cheese. So this recipe really kind of has it all. It looks very simple. Just add that in there.
It smells good.
It smells good. It's kind of hitting all the marks, isn't it? Okay, so I'm just going going to mix that through. It holds pretty well. So if you made this, say in the morning and your picnic is in the lunchtime, it will have enough time to come together. I sometimes will add an additional splash of oil to the top and maybe another splash of lemon juice and just, test it for seasoning and then platter it up, and it's usually a pretty big hit. So it stays kind of dry, and that's okay because, like I said, you have some ingredients in there that are kind of moist, and so as it sits, that moisture is going to draw out. So you don't want it super wet and soggy. But I'm going to give it a taste before we pass them out for you guys, just to make sure. You really don't have to do much to this one because the flavor is just so concentrated in there. So let's try. Yeah.
When you add avocado to it, do you roast the avocado?
You could. I usually just do it raw.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. You can use this bigger one here to scoop. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm so excited for you all to try that, and you'll get to try that in a second here. But let's move on to, in the meantime, we're kind of teasing you. See if I can keep you guys focused. But I want us to talk a little bit about our last topic for today because it's an important one and it sort of brings everything back together. And if there is time, I have a quick little activity for us to do. But let's walk through a couple of things here on our handouts. So when it comes to macronutrients, you probably all have heard that phrase. And sometimes, when it comes to nutrition, a lot of the stuff that we hear can be so overwhelming, so confusing. One day it's like something's good for you. One day something's really bad for you. Don't touch it. Don't eat it. Right? And so it's really overwhelming to know what to follow. And for a lot of history, when it comes to something like macronutrients, that term has been associated with too rigid a process of approaching food because it's like you have to count your calories. You have to count how much of this certain nutrient is in your diet. And I definitely am a firm believer that when it comes to your nutrition, it's specific to your body and your everything, right? Like your very unique set of circumstances. So it's not a one-size-fits all. But macronutrients are really important because, as you see here on the left, they are the nutrients that we consume in the largest amounts. So that's hence the term macro. But they are kind of the building blocks of the main key nutrients that we need in our bodies. So those are protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So they help us nourish and sustain our bodies, but they're going to be very unique to your set of circumstances and your individual body because they can be affected by your age, your gender, your size, and then your physical activity level, and that can change throughout the course of your life, right? So to say you have to have X amount of grams of protein, it's a good start, and there's a lot of information that you'll see that is very science-based that will say, okay, here's an estimate. But I often encourage people to be advocates when they talk to health professionals and say, okay, but these are my circumstances, Like you have some health conditions, so that's even more important. That's even more critical to understand, what does my body need right now so that I can be stable and I can manage all of these things, all these changes that are happening to my body, and I can stay nourished and healthy. So let's break it down a little bit and look at each one. And then I also want us to look at what happens when we're deficient or we're low in some of these nutrients. It helps with building and repairing muscles and tissue, so that's a big one. But if you think about protein energetically, you think of those types of foods, they keep us grounded, right? It's a big source of a lot of our diet, and so think of that as it's an element that keeps us grounded. If you think of the types of food sources that have protein, a lot of them are much more nutritionally dense, right? So a lot of meats, even if it is plant-based, some of these legumes and beans, more dense foods. But when our diets are low in protein, this can look like a couple different things, and these are just a few. It can look like a lowered resiliency to stress. So if we're experiencing any kind of physical stress, emotional stress, if we don't have enough protein, maybe that's gonna show up in that way. If you experience brittle hair or nails, that might be an indicator that you're low in protein. If you have issues with your digestion and it's just not quite firing as it should be, that could be another indication that you need a little more protein. It can even be linked to depression or low mood and even irritability. We've talked a little bit about sort of the gut and the brain connecting and talking to each other. And yeah, if you're not quite having enough of that key nutrient, then that can also indicate or cause some of these depression and anxiety issues. One important one is your calorie burning metabolism can slow down because you're not feeding your body enough of the protein. Maybe you're having some issues with not being able to concentrate or focus. And then one really important one that I have definitely experienced, maybe you all have too, is you have a tendency or a craving for sweets or carbohydrates or some kind of fatty food. So that's a really important one when we talk about looking for the cues or listening to the cues and being aware of sort of our body's natural wisdom of, like, what are you really craving? To go back and think about something like this, because maybe it is something as simple as you're just a little light in one of these key nutrients, and if you start to add those back into your diet in small ways, you'll start to notice a difference. So that's another thing that you can just easily start to track. And we were talking before about just kind of keeping a diary of certain foods just to know what things are affecting your body in certain ways. I'm getting thumbs up. You guys dig in and please try the salad because, yeah, I know it's a delicious one. And it will taste even more delicious the longer you let it sit. So, the next one is carbohydrates. So I feel like the carbohydrates are like the redheaded stepchild of nutrition because for many, many decades, there have been so many just conflicting views about cutting carbs or lowering carbs and all these trend diets that have come and gone. But we really do need carbs in our diet. And so they basically are the fuel that give us the energy. It's basically taking like sugar and transforming it into energy. So there's two different kinds. There's a simple carbohydrate, so think sugar, right? Candy, soda, refined grains with the fiber removed carbohydrates. Complex are the ones that are more, they will sustain your energy. They're a little more slowly absorbed. So think of things like whole grains. You're talking about quinoa, vegetables, beans and legumes, any kind of plant fiber. Those are they take the body a little bit longer to break down. So consequently, that energy that we're receiving is not as fast as those simple carbs, but they're going to help us stay sustained in that energy a little bit longer, which is good. So when we're low in those quality carbohydrates, what does that look like? Maybe you find yourself overeating. Maybe you're deficient or depleted in a certain nutrient. Maybe you're gaining some weight. Maybe you experience fatigue, or you have sort of these highs and lows of exhaustion. If you've ever thought about, eating some of those simple carb foods, which are kind of like, you can think about the fun foods, right? Which I don't ever like to attach a label to foods, but there are some foods that are more fun to eat, let's be honest, than others, right? And so if you eat, like maybe there's some pastries or cookies, right? A lot of times that has some of those refined flours or sugars. It's quick energy, it's that quick sugar. And you might feel great eating it, and then you're going to crash a little bit quicker, right? Because it's not that slow, sustained energy. You might experience some inflammation or maybe some constipation. Things are just not quite flowing because you're not putting the high quality or higher quality carbohydrates into your system. And then when it comes to the last macronutrient, fats, or also known as essential fatty acids, these are really critical as well because they're the building blocks of hormones, of cell walls, and really, really important, our brain, and just a lot of chemicals that impact metabolism. So that is also, in addition to carbohydrates getting a bad rap, fat is another one. And I would say a lot of times that has also come from our society and our culture associating fat with fat that we eat will then become fat on our body. which is a myth that really needs to be dispelled because we do need fat, and a lot of serious damage has been done to our society's just collective health and bodies because we have sort of listened to that message, and we've been deficient in fat that we need for our bodies to be firing on all cylinders. So when we talk about essential fatty acids or fats in the diet, they also help regulate blood sugar and insulin levels. And the quality of the fat is really key here. So you can have fat like foods that are, have hydrolyzed or hydroprocessed, kind of like those bad oils. I can't say it this morning. Hydrolyzed, something like that. Fats, or you could have something like olive oil, like we use today. That's a healthy fat, right? So you want to be looking for things that have those healthy sources of fats. The avocado would have been one. You could also get avocado oil. Fish like salmon that have the omega-3s. Walnuts are a great source of omegas. A very underrated fish, mackerel, and if you can find it smoked, it's delicious. You could put it in a salad like this, actually. Kind of put it on the top, that'd be great. But you want to have more of those high quality fats in your diet because they are supporting so many key things in your metabolism and in your body in general. So do not feel like you have to rule fat out of your diet because it is one of the three, if you look at it as kind of like a pyramid of like, I think all good things come in threes, right? So if you think of kind of like the trifecta of what you need to be flourishing in your health, you need every one of these components, the proteins, the carbs, and the fats. Let's take a look at what happens when you are deficient in fat. So you could feel just constantly hungry, or like your hunger is out of control. Like you just kind of keep eating and you just don't feel satiated. Because you might be pulling in some poor quality fats or poor quality carbohydrates, and it's just not, fueling you enough. You might have some trouble losing weight because the fat eventually does kind of get stored, and you're not able to metabolize normally like you should be. You might have some stiff or painful joints. Maybe that's an issue. Not sleeping well, some poor sleep. Again, because it's linked to the brain, right? It could be causing some cognition issues. Maybe you're feeling that brain fog or having trouble concentrating or just memory recall. And again, so a body deficient in dietary fat, all these good fats we're talking about, will willingly store excess or unneeded calories as body fat. So think about that. If there are areas in your day-to-day where you feel like something might be off balance, look to this because this is a good roadmap to start with, and then obviously consult with your physicians. And I always say, if you want to start with just some simple groundwork, get simple blood, some lab work done, because that's easily a black and white way to tell where you currently are, to get a baseline of where you're at, and then you work from there. And then maybe it is working with a nutritionist to say, well, maybe I need to add a little more protein into my diet. How would I do that? Maybe it's some of these other categories. But this is one thing I always like to circle back to because, one, it gets very overwhelming, and the term itself has tended to be associated with like people spend hours at the gym and they're counting their calories. And I have had conversations with people in the field who have the expertise around health, and the common conclusion is that unless you're, training to be in a particular sport, or you're an athlete and you need to have like the specific diet to perform for those sports, the average person should not be so specific in, I need to have this many calories, I need to have this many grams of protein. You have to do it for what works for your body. And I think that message can't be said loudly enough. So identify what feels good in your body when you're adding these things. Maybe your body doesn't want all of this stuff. It needs a combination, and it needs a little more of this and a little less of this. Because again, our bodies are going to go through different phases, and we need to adjust for that as well. So the last item I really want to impress upon everybody. And it took me a minute to kind of let this one sink in when I heard it a couple years ago, but I was like, this makes so much sense. So the body often craves the opposite of what it needs. So So for example, if you're craving sugar or you find yourself to be craving sugar, sweets, or carbohydrates, you might actually be lacking in some of these other things like high quality proteins and essential fatty acids. So the next time you're in a situation where you're reaching for something and you're like, I'm just stressed out, I've got too many things going on, think a little bit about what food you're choosing, because you might tend to be gravitating towards sort of your comfort things, which might be sweets. It is for a lot of people. Sometimes it's savory or salty, but usually it's a sweet thing. And just think about, what else in my day have I had today? Have I had enough protein today? The one thing I didn't mention on here, but people often include it in the conversation about macronutrients, is water, right? Water is essential to our bodies. And however your body is currently able to absorb water, we need to add that as another element. And sometimes people will say, drink a glass of water and then see how you feel. Do you still want to reach for whatever that item was? Maybe you still do, and maybe you just need to, because that's the thing that you need to connect with, and then you're cool after that. You're fine, right? Like, you can go about your day. I don't like to set up the dynamic that you can't have certain foods, because I was having this conversation with a colleague the other day, just saying, like, it's more important to me that we teach everybody how to make choices and how to educate people on everything when it comes to food. Because the worst thing is to have somebody have a relationship with food where they feel like they can't have something, that they're restricted from something. I want people to be more educated about what they're choosing and how it makes their particular body feel when they enjoy it and they eat it. If it's something that you eat every once in a while and you feel great, I say enjoy it. But we've spent so much time in our culture and our society, I'm getting on my soapbox here, but we have just setting up this kind of negative dynamic with people and food. And I think it's time for us as individuals to take that back a little bit and just say, no, this is my body, and I know what feels good, and I know what choices I can make to choose the certain foods that I'm going to choose. So that's my 2 cents soapbox on that. Any questions on any of that? Familiar things that maybe you're kind of uncertain about or you've heard of before, helpful?
I had my blood checked probably about a year ago, and it said that my protein was too high.
Too high.
And
Okay.
I'm like, well, what does that mean? Am I eating too much meat? Am I eating too much protein for it to show up that high? Is that basically what it is?
Not necessarily, because you have proteins in different ways in your bodies. So had you talked to your doctor about that? Like, what was their recommendation?
If I did, I don't remember what he said. All I could remember is that my protein levels were too high.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think it could also be the way that your body's absorbing things too. So I would definitely, it is helpful to go back periodically to check and just, again, get your baseline for it. That's why it is good to get the baseline, so that you know if something is a little off, why is it off? But I do think sometimes, like, for example, people absorb fat in a different way. And that can be an indicator of, like, certain organs not working properly. So maybe your protein level being higher than you anticipated, or your doctor saying, hey, here's a little red flag, that would have then triggered some additional examination to say, well, is there something within your system, your metabolic system, that's not processing protein in a certain way, and that's why it's reading a certain way? Those are the things that I would be looking for or asking. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It could be drug-induced though, too.
And
Depends on
medications.
what medications you're
Medications.
taking on our journeys,
Yes.
because it will mess with your blood work
Yeah.
to no end.
Yes, so that's, again, I think that's really critical. If there are medications that can have all sorts of, effects on your regular baseline kind of health, it is helpful to know that, discussing it with your physician before you start the medications, to just say, what can I anticipate? And I'm assuming that they will continue to monitor you throughout the course of your treatment, so that they can keep an eye on that if, for example, anything just kind of seems a little off. But again, it is specific to you, right? So your levels might be a little bit different from yours, but it is helpful to kind of know your baseline for that. But yeah, medications are are a tricky one because they can affect so many different things. And then there's all the side effects as well, which can throw you off with your nutrition, right? Because maybe you feel nauseous or you just don't have an appetite. You've lost your appetite, and so you're not getting all the nutrition that you need, even though you want and you know you need to be eating all these different nutrients, but you just at the moment can't. So, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Yes? Uh-huh.
Just an observation, I found that by eating protein, like front loading it, and then eating anything that's carbs at the end, that it impacts my glucose levels a lot
okay.
less than if I like kind of throw the carbs into, in with the protein or do the carbs first.
Okay.
It's just how it affects me.
Yes, well, and see, that's a good thing to notice, a very specific distinction for you and your body. Like, this is kind of how that works for me. That's really good, though, to notice that. I think being very self-aware about, how food affects your body is so critical, and we don't teach that enough. So hopefully you all are kind of getting a little bit of that from our class today. How are we doing on time? We got time to keep going a little more discussion? Okay, perfect. Well, let's take a look at the next page then. This is kind of a fun one, and I wanted to share this with you just because as a way to kind of wrap up how we talk about what is our relationship with food about and how is that affecting kind of us in general. I think there are 4 different categories of foods that we tend to crave. You might fall into one or the other, sometimes maybe more strongly the other or than others, or maybe you're a combination of some of these. So I'll just kind of go through. The first one is sweet, like we were talking about. But I wanted to get you all thinking about, you don't have any homework today per se, but I want you all to think about, like, what other things can you do to satisfy that sweet craving? One of the easiest things is fruit, right? And so we're entering into this peak season of just delicious fruits that are going to be available here. We were talking about watermelon, peaches I think are coming about. We'll see cherries and all these beautiful berries and things like that. But I think one thing, if you do tend to crave a lot of that sugar and those simple carbs, right? The candy, the sweets, the cakes, and all those yummy things, try sort of starting with fresh fruit. I have found that when I alter my diet and just start with that, the craving for the other stuff tends to sort of lessen. And when I do enjoy it, I find it not as pleasurable anymore because I've changed my palate to get accustomed to more of the fresh, raw, natural fruit flavor. So, and I tend to typically choose fruits that are a little bit lower in sugars and acidity, like natural sugars and acidity. So I used to love pineapple, but the acidity was killing my digestion. So I don't eat that as much anymore, but papaya, I love. And things like strawberries or blueberries, like our last recipe with that beautiful salad. Just anything that will satisfy that sense of sweetness. And one thing that I'll do too is I'll sometimes make a simple salad with just a little splash of nice vanilla and then a little bit of ground cinnamon. And just all of those things that are just super easy and simple combined together make a really nice, just a salad for me that's enjoyable and pleasing and kind of satisfies that sweetness for me. One of my other favorite things, if you are a chocolate lover, I have met a few people who are not, but good quality dark chocolate. And I would encourage you all, if you have places that you can go seek out beautiful, delicious, high quality chocolate, treat yourself to that because you will find that there are so many different notes and flavors and nuances of chocolate. It's kind of like coffee, right? So yeah, if you can find something like that, experiment because when you find the ones that are fruity or floral, they just hit just right and you just need that little piece and you're like, I am good.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
You said high quality chocolates. How do you know if it's high quality?
Because it tastes good to you.
Okay.
And I would say because of, like, when you taste a really high quality chocolate, it has the right amount of balance. So it has either the texture that's, like, if you're looking for really creamy, it's got, if you're a milk chocolate fan, it maybe have that. The quality of the chocolate itself, the cocoa bean, is high quality. So like I enjoyed a Snickers bar yesterday because that's one of my favorite candy bars. But when I taste like a super beautiful dark chocolate that's been made kind of small batch and it has just like all these deep complex flavors, I notice the difference night and day. It's like the Snickers bar is good. It kind of hits on a certain level and it's like, yeah, it's my comfort thing. but the quality, just a chunk of chocolate that's like that, and it has all these complexities of flavor because, you know, the bean is a certain kind of bean. Whatever they've added to the chocolate, those flavors, those notes come out, and you can really taste it. I mean, it's, if you have an opportunity, I believe there's a chocolate show. Oh, I don't know if it's here though. There's several around the country, but they have all these purveyors who come and you can sample all these different types of chocolate. That's an experience in itself. But having that kind of experience where you can go and try different things. I mean, we have stores here that have different chocolates. I mean, make a fun evening for yourself. Grab a glass of wine and then enjoy your chocolate, a little tasting for yourself, right? But something like that will make a difference, because I find that when I have something that's just a little bit of something that I enjoy, then I don't need to continue to consume, because that's all it takes for me. Moving on to salty. So we were talking about like the cheese in this recipe, things like olives to replace just regular table salt is a good idea. There's another ingredient that I tend to use in cooking. It's called tamari, and it's kind of like a soy sauce. That's a really good one that you can use to add some seasoning and salt to your foods. Grilling, roasting, anything like that to your foods will add another dimension of sort of this deeper, complex flavor that, you know, you don't have to replace, or you don't have to add salt. You can replace it with that. And then using different kinds of salts. So you could use table salt, kosher salt, the flaky kind of salt. If you've ever seen like the chocolate chip cookies with a little flake salt, they do that for a reason. One, it just looks cool, and the texture, and it draws out more of the sweetness of the baked good. So anytime you're baking, you always notice there's a pinch of salt or half a teaspoon of salt in your sweet goods. It's because you're drawing out more. It helps to elevate the flavor of the sweetness in the recipe. Okay, and then a couple last things. Crunchy, that has to be, I think, part of the equation. So we have definitely crunchy from the sugar snap peas. Any kind of nuts are great for that. You can season them on your own or just enjoy them raw. Stocking your fridge with containers of like cucumbers. We talked about cucumbers. I like those carrots that are sliced and they have the crinkles on them. They're like little round ones instead of just carrot sticks. That's kind of fun. Celery, anything crunchy like that. Not only do they provide fiber, but they've got that texture that we crave sometimes. And they can be paired with a nice healthy dip like hummus. I also like a good potato chip, I'm not going to lie. But sometimes I just actually want like a celery stick because it's the crunch that I'm more after. So learning to identify what is it that I'm really after. Is it the texture, the flavor, what is the smell? Like think about those things. And then the last one is creamy. So one of my favorites is taking like a feta cheese and adding all sorts of fresh herbs or maybe some dried herbs and some good olive oil, packing it in foil and putting it in the oven for just a few minutes until it warms through, and spreading that on some crackers or on some veggies. It's super easy, but it hits kind of all that creamy, luscious, like rich flavor that sometimes you're craving. So that is kind of my 2 cents on that. And I find this is sort of a fun activity to do, and hopefully you all will kind of take some of this with you as you're going about your day in the next coming months, as you're enjoying summer foods, hopefully. And any kind of meals that you're enjoying, because I want you all to definitely connect again back to your bodies and what your bodies are telling you, but also, you know, some of these things that come up in life, like all these experiences that we're having, they sometimes trigger what we're choosing. And if we spend a little bit of time slowing down and really understanding, well, what is it really that I'm craving? Or what is it really that I need right now? What is it here that I need? This is going to help us identify more for our unique situation, our unique bodies, what our body wants and what we need. So we've kind of come to the end of our series in our class today, but I want to say a special thank you to Jose for having me here. I've really enjoyed teaching this class. I've really enjoyed all of you and getting to hear, you know, what you all have thought of the class, and hopefully some of these things that have been helpful to you. But I hope to be back, and I hope this was valuable for you all.